Have you ever experienced a moment when everything seemed to be going well, only for life to suddenly take something important away from you? Sometimes what we see as a loss can actually be the beginning of something much greater. Miguel was a simple man. He lived with his wife, Clara, and their two children, Joaquim and Elisa, in a small village surrounded by rolling hills and lush green fields. His livelihood came from the land and his cattle. He had a modest farm and a few oxen that helped him with his work. Life was tough but stable. He would wake up before sunrise, work hard, and return home at dusk. Deep down, Miguel feared change. He clung to his routine like a boat to a safe harbor. He never allowed himself to dream of something bigger. The village was his entire world, and he believed he would spend the rest of his life there. But life has a way of surprising us. And when we least expect it, something happens to push us out of our comfort zone. What Miguel didn't know was that everything he knew was about to fall apart. Before we continue with our story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss more inspiring stories that will uplift your life. Night fell over the village, bringing with it a heavy silence. The once starry sky began to darken with thick clouds. The wind whistled through the trees, and the scent of rain filled the air. Miguel sat at his doorstep, gazing at the horizon, unaware that this would be the last night his life would remain the same. Shortly after midnight, the sky unleashed its fury. A storm unlike anything the village had ever seen struck with full force. The wind howled like a raging beast, knocking down fences and ripping tiles from rooftops. The relentless rain poured down, turning dirt paths into rivers of mud. Miguel jolted awake at the sound of a thunderclap so powerful it made the house tremble. He rushed to the window, his heart pounding, and saw the worst: his crops were being destroyed. The wind snapped the cornstalks, tore the leaves from his vegetables, and carried away the rich soil. Grabbing a raincoat, he ran outside, desperate to save what he could. But there was nothing he could do. The force of nature was beyond him. Then came the final blow, a deafening explosion. A lightning bolt tore across the sky and struck his barn. Within seconds, flames engulfed the place where he stored his hay, grain, and, most importantly, his oxen. Miguel tried to run to them, but the fire was too intense. He heard the desperate cries of his animals before everything fell silent. Kneeling in the mud, he buried his face in his hands. His crops were gone. His cattle lost. His only means of survival reduced to ashes. That night, everything he knew was taken from him. And now, how do you start over when you've lost everything? The sun rose timidly that morning, as if ashamed to shine upon the scene of devastation. Miguel sat on the ground, still covered in mud, too drained to stand. His wife, Clara, and their children watched him with tear-filled eyes. What was once a barn was now nothing more than a pile of charred wood and ashes scattered by the wind. The crops he had worked so hard to cultivate were reduced to a field of broken branches and torn leaves. Reality crashed down on him with crushing weight. Now what? What will we eat? How will I provide for my family? Fear gripped his chest. Miguel had always been a strong man, but in the face of this disaster, he felt small. Powerless. Clara, ever wise and calm, stepped closer and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "We'll find a way, Miguel. God has never abandoned us." But Miguel couldn't see any hope. He felt betrayed by life, punished for something he couldn't understand. His fear wasn't just about food or money, it was about the future. He didn't know how to do anything else besides farming and raising cattle. How could he start over when everything he had ever known had been taken from him? In the days that followed, the village came together to help. Neighbors brought food and offered some seeds, but Miguel knew this was only a temporary relief. The land would take months to recover, and without his oxen, he had no way to plow it. It was the end of the life he had always known. Late at night, he lay staring at the ceiling, asking himself, "Why did this happen to me? What did I do to deserve this?" Little did he know that beneath this tragedy, a new path was beginning to take shape. Days passed, but Miguel remained trapped in uncertainty. Every morning, he stepped outside, looked at the ruined fields, and felt a lump in his throat. The village was willing to help, but he knew no one could support him forever. He needed to find a way out, but how? With no answers, he decided to walk to the neighboring town in search of work. He walked for hours, his thoughts as heavy as stones. He felt like a failure, a man who had lost everything and had no idea how to move forward. Then, as he stopped to rest under the shade of a tree, an old man approached. His face was marked by time, but his eyes shone with an incredible sense of calm. He wore simple clothes and carried a staff, like a traveler who had seen many roads. "May I sit?" the old man asked with a gentle smile. Miguel nodded, not really in the mood for conversation. The man sat beside him and, after a brief silence, spoke. "You seem to be carrying a heavy burden in your heart." Miguel sighed and told him everything about the storm, the loss of his crops and cattle, and the fear that gripped him when he thought of the future. The old man listened attentively, never interrupting. When Miguel finished, he expected words of comfort, something like "Be patient, things will get better." But instead, the old man simply smiled and said, "Sometimes, God has to take something away to give us something greater." Miguel frowned. "What do you mean?" "I lost everything. How could this possibly be a good thing?" The old man reached into his pocket, took out a handful of seeds, and scattered them on the ground. "Look at these seeds. If I keep them in my pocket, they'll never grow. But if I toss them into the soil, they must break apart, endure the darkness underground, face the rain and the sun, only then can they become something greater." He looked at Miguel with deep, knowing eyes. "What if this loss is just the beginning of something new for you?" The words echoed in Miguel's mind. What if God was closing one door only to open another? But which door? Which path? The old man stood up, patted Miguel on the shoulder, and said before walking away, "Don't mourn what you've lost. Look around and see what you can still achieve." And with that, he walked off without another word, leaving Miguel behind, lost in thought. Could it be that this tragedy was actually an opportunity in disguise? The old man's words wouldn't leave Miguel's mind. What if this loss is just the beginning of something new? But what could he do? No cattle, no fertile land, no direction. The next morning, as he watched his children playing in the yard, Miguel made a decision. He couldn't wait for a miracle. If the village could no longer sustain him, maybe the city could. He kissed his wife on the forehead and set off for the neighboring town. It was a bigger place, filled with shops, markets, and buildings everywhere. Miguel had never imagined living away from the land, but now he had no choice. He walked street after street, asking for work. Many doors shut in his face. No experience, no job, they told him. The weight of frustration began to sink in. But as he passed a construction site, he saw a group of men hauling planks and bricks. He approached the foreman, a sturdy man with a firm gaze. "I'm looking for work. Miguel said humbly. I can learn quickly. The foreman studied him for a moment, then shrugged. You've got strong hands. Start by carrying wood and cement. If you're any good, we'll see what happens. And just like that, without ever having held a hammer before, Miguel began his new journey. The first few days were tough. His body, used to working the land, struggled with the weight of the tools. His hands grew calloused, and his muscles ached at the end of each day. But to his surprise, something inside him began to awaken. He was learning. He watched the carpenters cut wood, the masons lay bricks. Slowly, he started to enjoy the craft. By the end of the month, when he received his first paycheck, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Maybe this wasn't the life he had planned, but what if it was the beginning of something much greater? Time passed, and Miguel was no longer the same man who had arrived in the city carrying the weight of failure. The hard work in construction had transformed both his body and mind. He learned how to cut wood, lay bricks, measure, and plan. At first, he only carried materials, but with dedication and keen observation, he started assisting in carpentry. The foreman took notice of his effort. You learn fast, Miguel. Have you ever thought about becoming a real carpenter? He asked one day, watching Miguel sand a wooden plank with precision. Miguel had never considered it. He had always seen himself as a farmer, a man of the land. But now his hands were creating something new. With the money he earned, he was able to send some home to Clara and the children. They were doing well, supported by the kindness of the village, but they were waiting for the day Miguel would return with good news. And he was sure of one thing: he would not return empty-handed. One night, as he rested after a long day's work, he looked at his calloused hands and smiled. Those calluses were no longer just marks of struggle. They were marks of growth. That night, for the first time since the storm, Miguel didn't feel fear about the future. He was building something, not just with wood and tools, but within himself. He didn't yet know where this path would lead him, but one thing was certain: he was no longer the man who had once wept over his ruined land. Months passed, and Miguel became a skilled carpenter. He was no longer just carrying wood and cement. Now, he was building furniture, doors, and roofs. His craftsmanship was praised, and little by little, he started gaining recognition among the city's builders. Then one day, the foreman pulled him aside. Miguel, I see real potential in you. Have you ever thought about opening your own workshop? Miguel chuckled, thinking it was a joke. How? I don't even have my own tools, let alone the money for that. The foreman crossed his arms and looked at him firmly. And when you first got here, did you have any experience? Miguel fell silent. No, he didn't. But you learned. You worked hard. If you've come this far, why not take the next step? The foreman's words echoed in Miguel's mind for days. What if he was right? What if he could dream bigger? Then, he made a bold decision. With the savings he had gathered, he bought his first set of tools and rented a small space in town. He started with simple orders: tables, chairs, doors. But soon, word spread, and more people came looking for his work. The man who once thought he had lost everything now had a trade, his own business, and a newfound purpose. And deep down, he knew none of this would have happened if the storm hadn't destroyed his old life. Years later, Miguel returned to the village. But he was no longer the man who had left with his head down, feeling defeated. Now, he was a successful man, the owner of his own carpentry business, providing for his family with dignity. As he walked through the fields where his old farm once stood, he felt a tightness in his chest. That land no longer belonged to him, but he didn't feel sadness. On the contrary, if he hadn't lost everything, he never would have discovered his true calling. Miguel found Clara and their children waiting at the doorstep. Now, they had a new home, bigger, more comfortable. His children had grown, their eyes shining with pride as they looked at him. That night, he sat with his family around the fire and shared his story. At first, I thought this storm was the worst thing that had ever happened to me. But now I understand. God wasn't punishing me. He was pushing me towards something greater. He looked down at his hands, once calloused from working the land, now strong and skillful in carpentry. Sometimes, when we lose something, we think it's the end. But it might just be God opening a door we never saw before. That night, Miguel slept peacefully, knowing that the greatest lesson of his life had been learned. Challenges aren't the end, they're the beginning of a new path. Moral of the story: life often teaches us through hardship. What seems like a tragedy may actually be a fresh start in disguise. Losing something doesn't mean we've been abandoned, it means we're being guided towards something greater. If Miguel had never lost his farm and his cattle, he never would have discovered his true talent and purpose. The storm that destroyed his past was the same one that cleared the way for his future. Remember this: sometimes, God doesn't take things away to punish us, but to set us free. What looks like an ending may be the beginning of your greatest blessing. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs this message of hope.